My grandson hadn't spoken a word in 2 years. So when my son and daughter-in-law left for vacation and 8-year-old Noah suddenly whispered, "Grandpa, don't take the medicine Mom gave you," I thought I had imagined it. I hadn't. His voice was soft, but perfectly clear. I stared at him. "What did you say?" Noah pointed at the pills my daughter-in-law, Melissa, had left on the kitchen counter. "Don't take them." My fingers went cold around the edge of the table. For months, Melissa had been helping organize my medication. She called it one less thing for a 68-year-old widower to worry about. And lately, I had been forgetting things. Appointments, Ks, conversations I could have sworn had never happened. My son Derek had even started saying, "Dad, maybe you shouldn't be handling everything by yourself anymore." I believed him. That was the part that still keeps me awake. Because once Noah finally started talking, he didn't tell me some complicated secret. He simply told me the little things he had seen, while everyone assumed a silent child wasn't paying attention. And those little things made me start checking dates. Then bank records. Then medical notes. Then a folder my son never expected me to open. What I eventually discovered wasn't just about a pill. My own family had been quietly building a future for me without asking whether I wanted it. And when they finally realized the confused old man they had been documenting was keeping records of his own, it was already too late. They wanted my silence. Instead, they gave me a reason to stop protecting them. My name is Kenneth Walker, though everyone has called me Ken since I was 20. I was 68 years old and retired after 36 years as a municipal building inspector outside Columbus, Ohio, the kind of job where you learned quickly that small details mattered because a loose railing or a missing signature could become somebody else's disaster. I had been a widower for 2 years, and since losing my wife, Marilyn, I had learned that an empty house could make even ordinary sounds feel too loud. That Saturday morning, the house wasn't empty. My son Derek stood near the front door checking his phone while his wife, Melissa, made one last trip through my kitchen. Their suitcases were already loaded into the SUV. They were headed south for a week, something involving a beach resort, a pool, and 7 days without answering work calls. Noah sat at my kitchen table with his knees pulled up against the chair, 8 years old, brown hair falling over his forehead, a red sweatshirt even though the morning was warm, and silent. He had been that way for nearly 2 years, not deaf, not unable to understand us. He could read, write, nod, point, and follow every conversation in the room. He went to school. He worked with people who were supposed to help him, but after Marilyn died, words seemed to leave him one by one until eventually there were none. At first, I kept waiting for him to speak again. I would ask whether he wanted pancakes or eggs and stare at his mouth longer than I should have. I would tell him a joke and listen for even the smallest laugh. Once, months after Marilyn's funeral, I thought I heard him say something from the back seat of my truck. I pulled over so fast the driver behind me leaned on his horn. Noah had only coughed. After that, I stopped waiting quite so obviously. You can love a child without making him feel like every breath has to become a miracle. So when Derek asked if Noah could stay with me while they were gone, I said yes before he finished the question. "He likes it here," I told him. Derek gave Noah a quick glance. "He likes that you don't make him do much." There was a little smile with it, so I let it pass. That had become a habit of mine with Derek. Let it pass. Melissa opened one of my kitchen cabinets, then shut it again. "Your coffee filters are almost gone, Dad. I've got more in the pantry." "You sure?" I looked at her. She smiled. Melissa had a way of making concern sound like something you should apologize for causing. "I'm sure." "All right, just checking." She crossed to the kitchen counter where my pill organizer sat beside the sugar bowl. She opened the Saturday evening compartment and tipped several pills into a small white dish. "There," she said. "That way you don't have to mess with the box tonight. I can handle the box." "I know you can." Her answer came too quickly. Then she patted my arm. "Just remember to take your medicine tonight, okay?" Derek looked up from his phone and checked the stove before bed. I turned toward him. "Why wouldn't I check the stove?" He shrugged. "You asked me last week if you'd left it on. I asked if I'd left the burner on after making soup." "Exactly. That doesn't mean I did." "Dad," he laughed softly. "Nobody said you did." Melissa glanced between us. "Derek." "What?" "I'm just saying." I hated how quickly I felt the need to defend myself. Maybe that was what getting older did. A man could spend half his life being trusted to inspect schools, apartment buildings, churches, and office towers, then forget where he put his glasses twice in 1 week and suddenly everyone watched him near the stove. I looked toward Noah. He was staring at the white dish on the counter. Not at Derek, not at Melissa. At the pills. You okay, buddy? I asked. His eyes moved to mine. He nodded. Melissa walked over and kissed the top of his head. Be good for Grandpa. Noah stiffened slightly beneath her hand. It was so small, I almost missed it. Then Derek grabbed the handle of the largest suitcase. We should get moving. I followed them to the door. Melissa hugged me. Call if you need anything. I've been living alone for 2 years. I know. So I probably won't need emergency instructions on how to survive until next Saturday. She laughed. There's my stubborn father-in-law. Derek leaned in and gave me the sort of one-armed hug men in our family had been giving each other for 30 years. Seriously, Dad, take it easy this week. I'm watching an 8-year-old, not climbing Mount Everest, just saying. He looked past me toward Noah. Listen to Grandpa. Noah didn't move. Derek opened the door. A warm August breeze came through the entryway, carrying the smell of cut grass from my neighbor's yard. Melissa called one last time from the porch. Medicine tonight, Dad. Yes, Melissa. Promise? I gave her a look. She laughed again and walked toward the SUV. I stood in the doorway while Derek backed out of the driveway. He raised 2 fingers from the steering wheel. Melissa waved. I waved back. Then the SUV disappeared around the corner. The house became quiet. Not the peaceful kind, just suddenly quiet. I closed the door. The latch clicked. Behind me, the wooden rocker in the living room stopped creaking. I turned. Noah had been rocking gently in it since before his parents left. Now he sat perfectly still. His eyes were fixed on me. Noah? He stood. For a second, I thought he wanted something from the kitchen. Instead, he walked toward me. Slowly. His hands were clenched against the sides of his sweatshirt. What is it, buddy? He looked past me toward the kitchen counter, toward the little white dish Melissa had prepared. Then he looked back at me. His lips moved. At first, no sound came out. I leaned closer. Noah? His voice was thin from disuse, but it was a voice. Clear. Real. Grandpa. Every muscle in my body locked. I couldn't answer. He swallowed. Then he whispered, Don't take the medicine Mom gave you. For 2 years, I had imagined the first words I might someday hear from my grandson. I had imagined my name, a question, maybe something about Marilyn. I had never imagined a warning. I crouched in front of him. What do you mean? Noah looked toward the kitchen again. I kept my voice low. I'm not mad. You're not in trouble. I just need to understand. He walked past me. I followed him to the counter. He stared at the pills without touching them. Then he lifted one finger and pointed at a single tablet in the dish. His hand trembled. I looked down at it, then back at him. Noah? He leaned close enough that I could feel his breath against my sleeve. Mom puts that one in when you're not looking. For a few seconds, I could only stare at the pill Noah had pointed to. I wanted to ask 10 questions at once, but the look on his face stopped me. His shoulders had drawn up near his ears, and his eyes kept moving toward the front door as if Derek and Melissa might come back through it at any moment. So I did the hardest thing I could think of. I slowed down. I pulled out a chair and sat beside him instead of standing over him. You don't have to explain everything, I said. Just tell me what you can. Noah looked at the white dish again. I pointed to the tablet. This one? He nodded. You've seen Mom put it in there? Another nod. When I'm here? He shook his head. When I leave the room? He nodded. That was enough for the moment. I took a sheet of paper from the junk drawer and placed it between us with a pencil. If talking feels hard, you can draw it. He stared at the page for a while, then drew a square that looked like my pill organizer. Beside it, he made a stick figure with long hair. Melissa, I assumed. Then he drew another stick figure walking away from the table. Me. He tapped the long-haired figure and then the small square. She puts it in after I leave? He nodded. How many times have you seen that? Noah held up 2 fingers. Maybe twice. Maybe 2 meant more than once. I did not press him. I kept my voice even. Does she say anything when she does it? He shook his head. Does your dad know? That question made him freeze. I regretted it immediately. You don't have to answer. He picked at the corner of the paper. Then he whispered. Dad said. His voice disappeared. I waited. Dad said what? Noah looked down at his hands. You forget more after. The words hit harder than I expected. I did not ask him what Derek meant. I could see from Noah's face that he did not know. He had heard a sentence adults probably thought meant nothing to a quiet child, and he had held on to it. Okay, I said softly. Thank you for telling me. He looked surprised. That's all? That's all. I folded the paper and put it in the blue ceramic bowl where Marilyn used to keep grocery coupons. Then I picked up the tablet Noah had pointed to. I did not throw it away. I did not crush it. I wrapped it carefully in a small piece of wax paper and slipped it into an empty envelope. If there was an explanation, I wanted the pill available to be checked. The rest of my evening medicine remained in the dish. I took the tablets I recognized from my current prescriptions and left the questionable ones sealed in the envelope. Noah watched the entire time. You okay with that? He nodded. After dinner, we watched an old nature program about wolves. Noah sat on the rug with a blanket over his legs, and for almost an hour he did not speak again. I did not mind. Around 8:30, my phone rang. Derek. I looked at Noah before answering. His eyes went straight to the phone. Hey, I said. You two surviving? So far. Did Noah eat? Grilled cheese, tomato soup, and half an apple. Good. I waited for him to ask how Noah was doing. He did not. Instead, Derek said, You take your pills yet? The question came so quickly that I glanced toward the envelope on the counter. Yes. All of them? I looked at Noah. He had stopped watching the television. Yes, I said again. Every pill I intended to take had been swallowed. It was not exactly the answer Derek thought I was giving, but I was not ready to tell him that. He exhaled. Good. I leaned back in my chair. Why are you so interested in my medicine tonight? I'm always interested. No, you're usually interested in whether I locked the door or paid the electric bill. He gave a short laugh. Dad, don't start. I'm not starting anything. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked, You feeling tired? Not particularly. You will. I frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. You've just been sleeping better when you take everything Melissa sets out. I looked toward the white dish. Noah was watching me now. I could have confronted Derek. I could have told him Noah had spoken. I could have asked why his son seemed afraid of one particular pill. Instead, I stayed quiet. That was not surrender. For the first time in a long while, it was a choice. So Noah's doing fine? Derek finally asked. He's fine. Okay. Another pause. Then Derek went quiet, and when he spoke again, his voice was lower. Good. You're always easier the next morning when you take everything. After Derek hung up, I stood in the kitchen with the phone still against my ear. The word easier bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I stared at the pill I had tucked into folded wax paper. The next morning, I woke before 7. For months, mornings had felt like pushing through wet cotton. I would open my eyes and wait for my thoughts to line up. That Sunday was different. My head was clearer. Not enough to make me believe I had solved anything, but enough that I noticed. I made coffee, toasted bread, and found Noah already at the table with colored pencils. You sleep okay? I asked. He nodded. I poured him orange juice and reached for my phone. That was when I saw the reminder. Coffee with Frank, 9:30. I looked at the clock, 9:42. Damn. Noah glanced up. Sorry, Grandpa forgot something. Frank Dawson had worked with me at the city for 22 years. We met for coffee every other Sunday, and I had missed it completely. For a moment, the clearer head I had been so pleased with felt like a trick. I called Frank. He laughed after I apologized. Ken, if this is the worst thing you do at 68, you're ahead of me. He rescheduled for Tuesday, but I did not laugh when I hung up. I had not taken the pill Melissa left for me, and I had still forgotten. That mattered. I pulled an old yellow legal pad from the drawer beside the refrigerator. At the top, I wrote the date. Under it, I made 4 headings: sleep, medicine, appointments, mistakes. It was an old habit coming back. For 36 years, I inspected buildings for the city. Most problems started small. A date that did not match. A permit issued after work had begun. A contractor insisting something happened Tuesday when the receipt said Thursday. I learned not to argue with memory when paper could settle it. Under mistakes, I wrote, forgot coffee with Frank. My fault. That last part mattered. If I was going to find out what was happening, I could not turn every mistake into evidence against Derek and Melissa just because I was angry. After breakfast, I called my pharmacy and asked the pharmacist to review my current medications. One by one, she read them aloud. I placed each bottle on the table as she named it. When she finished, one pill remained wrapped beside my coffee cup. I have another tablet here, I said. It's not in a bottle. She paused. Can you describe it? I did. She asked a few questions, then said, Mr. Walker, it is not on the active medication list we have for you. I don't want to identify a loose tablet over the phone. Bring it in, or take it to your doctor if you're concerned. So nobody filled it for me recently? Not through us. I thanked her and wrote the words exactly as she had said them, not on active medication list. The phrase bothered me because the pill itself did not look entirely unfamiliar. I stared at it until a memory surfaced. Marilyn's last winter. I had barely slept then. Some nights I sat beside her bed listening to her breathe because I was afraid something would happen while I slept. My doctor had prescribed something for a while. I remembered a small tablet at night. I also remembered Marilyn teasing me one morning because I had poured coffee into my cereal bowl. Later, I stopped taking it. At least, I thought I had. Why? I pressed my fingers against my forehead. There it was again. That blank place where certainty should have been. Instead of guessing, I wrote another line. Possible old prescription from Marilyn's illness. Need doctor to confirm. No accusation, no conclusion, just something that could be checked. By noon, the legal pad had become the most important object in my kitchen. For the first time in weeks, writing things down made me feel steadier than trying to remember them. I recorded what I ate, what I took, and every little thing I caught myself forgetting. When I misplaced my reading glasses and found them on the porch, I wrote that down too. Noah watched me from across the table. After a while, he pushed his drawing paper aside and pointed at my pad. You want some paper? He nodded. I slid a clean sheet toward him with a pencil. He bent over it for several minutes, shielding the page with his arm. Then he turned it around. He had drawn a rectangle in blue pencil, a folder, judging by the tab at the top. Underneath it, in careful block letters, he had written one word, Grandpa. I looked from Noah's drawing to the hallway that led to my office. Blue folder? I asked. He nodded. Mine. Another nod. He tapped the word Grandpa with the end of his pencil. I did not ask anything else. That had become my rule with him. One question at a time. If he wanted to give me more, he would. My office was the smallest bedroom in the house, though Marilyn had always called it my command center. Filing cabinet against one wall. Desk under the window. 30 years of inspection notebooks stacked in 2 banker boxes I had never found the courage to throw away. There were several blue folders in the cabinet. Taxes. Insurance. House repairs. I opened them one by one until Noah, standing silently in the doorway, lifted his hand. He pointed to the bottom drawer. Inside was a darker blue folder I recognized immediately. Derek had helped me put it together after Marilyn died. Important stuff, he had called it. At the time, I had been grateful. For months after losing Marilyn, envelopes piled up unopened because every official-looking document seemed to require a part of my brain I did not have available. Derek stepped in. He organized insurance papers, bank information, and copies of the estate documents. I had thought that was what sons did. The folder was thicker than I remember. I carried it to my desk. The first sections looked normal enough. Copies of account statements. Insurance information. My trust summary. A few pages connected to the financial authority I had given Derek during Marilyn's illness so he could help with bills while I was driving back and forth to the hospital. Then I found a sheet of lined notebook paper tucked between 2 printed statements. At the top, in Derek's handwriting, were 2 words, Dad Incidents. I read them twice. Below the heading was a list of dates. March 5th, lost truck keys, found in freezer. March 19th, missed cardiology appointment. April 2nd, electric bill, unpaid. April 18th, back door left unlocked overnight. May 9th, couldn't remember conversation about roof estimate. There were more. Some had little notes beside them. Melissa witnessed. Derek corrected. Dad denied. I sat back in my chair. Noah had moved to the rug beside my desk. He was drawing again, but every few seconds his eyes lifted toward me. The worst part was that some of those things had happened. The truck keys had gone missing. I remembered tearing the house apart for nearly an hour. Melissa had found them later. I did not remember the freezer, but I remembered how embarrassed I had been when everyone laughed about it over dinner. The roof estimate bothered me too. Derek had mentioned something about replacing shingles, and I genuinely could not remember the first conversation he claimed we had. Those entries landed hard because they were not inventions. Then I reached the cardiology appointment. March 19th. I knew that date. My cardiologist's office had originally scheduled me for that Tuesday, but Melissa had called and moved it because she was supposed to drive me and had a work conflict. I had written the new date on the kitchen calendar. I stood and went to check. The calendar still hung beside the refrigerator. March 19th had a line through it. Beside it, in Melissa's handwriting was, Moved to March 26. I returned to the office and stared at Derek's list. Missed cardiology appointment. No mention that Melissa had changed it. I kept reading. April 2nd. Electric bill unpaid. That one had embarrassed me badly. Derek had discovered the past due notice and given me a lecture about keeping up with household expenses. But something scratched at my memory. Autopay. For years, that bill had paid itself. I opened the utility folder and found the notice. Then another sheet. A confirmation showing the automatic payment method had been changed near the end of March. Authorized by Derek Walker. I sat very still. That did not prove he had deliberately caused the missed payment. There could have been a perfectly reasonable explanation. So I took my yellow legal pad and made 2 columns. Confirmed mistake. Needs checking. Lost keys went under the first. The appointment and electric bill went under the second. I refused to cheat, even in my own favor. That was another thing inspections had taught me. If you ignored evidence because you disliked what it said, you were no better than the contractor hiding rotten wood behind fresh drywall. I returned to the list. Back door unlocked. Conversation forgot. Wrong day for garbage pickup. Asked same question twice. The handwriting changed halfway down the page. Some entries were Derek's. Others looked like Melissa's. This had not been written in one afternoon. They had been adding to it for months. Then I noticed the earliest date. January 12th. I pulled my legal pad closer. I knew when I had first told Derek I was concerned about my memory because I had mentioned it after forgetting Frank's birthday dinner. That had been in late February. I checked my calendar to be certain. February 24th. I looked back at the first entry. January 12th. 6 weeks earlier, a cold pressure settled behind my ribs. I had spent months believing Derek and Melissa had simply noticed the same problems I had noticed. But that was not what the dates said. Someone had started documenting my decline before I knew I was supposed to be declining. The date at the top of Derek's list bothered me more than anything written beneath it. January 12th. 6 weeks before I had ever admitted to him that I was worried about my memory. I carried the blue folder back to the kitchen and spread everything across the table. Noah sat at the other end with his pencils, quiet again, but not withdrawn. Every so often he looked up as if he understood that I was doing something important. For most of my working life, people assumed a building inspector walked around looking for cracked foundations and bad wiring. The truth was less dramatic. Most of the job was comparison. What did the contractor say happened? What did the permit say? What date was the work actually done? When those 3 things did not match, that was where you started looking. So I treated Derek's list exactly the same way. I started with the garbage pickup. April 23rd. Dad put trash out one day early. That one was mine. I remembered dragging the cans down Monday night before realizing collection had shifted because of a holiday. I wrote beside it, accurate. Then I checked another entry, May 9th. Dad forgot roof conversation. I searched my email. Derek had sent me an estimate on May 8th at 9:14 in the evening with the message, "We talked about this already. Just look it over." I searched backward. No earlier email. No text. No call from him that week longer than 32 seconds. Maybe we had discussed it in person. I could not prove we had not. So I wrote, unconfirmed. That was how I went through the list. I did not erase my mistakes just because I wanted Derek to be wrong. The lost keys stayed. The early garbage stayed. I had asked Melissa the same question twice at Easter dinner. I remembered her laughing and answering it again. That stayed too. But the cardiology appointment changed categories. So did the electric bill. Another entry claimed I had forgotten to renew my homeowner's insurance. An email showed Derek had told the insurance office he was handling the renewal for me, then forwarded the paperwork 3 days after the due date. Another said I had failed to return a call from my dentist. My phone records showed no incoming call from their office that week. By lunchtime, the page looked different. Not false. That would have been easier. It was a mixture. Real mistakes surrounded by incidents that had been shortened, rearranged, or stripped of context until they all pointed in the same direction. That frightened me more than a page full of lies. A lie could be exposed. A half-truth could sit comfortably in a room and introduce itself as concern. I reached the entry about the back door. April 18th. Back door left unlocked overnight. Melissa found it open at 7:15. I remembered that morning. Melissa had come in carrying coffee and found the door unlocked. Derek had given me a long speech about safety. You could wake up with somebody standing over your bed, Dad. I had checked that lock every night for weeks afterward. I looked toward Noah. Do you remember the back door being unlocked? He stopped coloring. I immediately regretted the question. You don't have to answer. His eyes moved toward the mudroom. Then he got down from his chair. I followed him. Beside the back door hung a wooden key rack Marilyn bought at a craft fair years ago. 3 hooks. One for my truck, one for the shed, one for the spare house key. The spare hook was empty. Noah pointed at it. What about the key? He rubbed his thumb against 2 fingers. I waited. Dad had it. My throat tightened. Your dad had the spare key? Noah nodded. When? His shoulders lifted. I don't know. That answer did more to reassure me than a perfect date would have. He was remembering what an 8-year-old remembered. A hand. A key. His father. Not a timeline. I wrote it down exactly that way. Noah remembers Derek had spare key. Date unknown. Nothing more. When we returned to the kitchen, I looked at the list again and suddenly saw another problem. Derek had told my doctor, relatives, and apparently himself that I was becoming too confused to manage ordinary life. Yet on Saturday morning, he had driven away for 7 days and left his 8-year-old son in my care. No nurse, no babysitter checking in, no neighbor instructed to watch me. Just me and Noah. If Derek truly believed I might forget the stove, leave doors unlocked, miss medication, and lose track of time, why was he comfortable leaving his child here? I circled that question. It did not prove I was fine. It proved Derek's story had a hole in it. I went back to the blue folder. Behind the incident page was a printed email I had overlooked before. Derek had sent it to someone whose name I did not recognize. The subject line was simple. Dad capacity questions. I read the first paragraph. Then I stopped. Derek was not asking how to help me remember appointments. He was asking what documentation would be needed if I could no longer manage my own financial affairs. For the first time, his concern about my memory had a purpose. I read Derek's email 3 times before I closed the folder. Dad capacity questions. That phrase followed me through the rest of the afternoon. I could have called Derek right then. A younger version of me probably would have. But 36 years inspecting other people's work had taught me something useful. The moment you accuse someone, they stop explaining and start defending. So I kept quiet. The next morning, I called Dr. Elaine Carter's office and asked whether she had an opening. I had seen her for almost 12 years. She knew about Marilyn's illness, my sleepless months afterward, and most of the ordinary complaints a man collects by 68. There had been a cancellation. I could come in at 11. I left Noah with Frank Dawson for a couple of hours. Frank lived 6 minutes away, had known Noah since he was a baby, and asked no questions when I said I had a doctor's appointment. I brought 3 things with me: the loose pill sealed in a small plastic bag, the medication list from my pharmacy, and my yellow legal pad. Dr. Carter entered the room, glanced at what I had spread across my lap, and raised an eyebrow. You came prepared. I used to make contractors nervous the same way. That got a smile from her. It disappeared when I handed her the pill. I want to know if this belongs with anything you currently prescribe me. She turned the bag under the examination light without opening it. Where did you get it? My pill organizer. Who fills that? I hesitated. My daughter-in-law has been helping. Dr. Carter looked at me for another second, then turned to the computer. I'm not going to identify a loose tablet from appearance alone, but we can compare your records. She opened my medication history. I watched her scroll. Then I saw a phrase on the screen. Family reports increased confusion. My stomach tightened. Stop. She looked over. What? That line. She followed my finger. Oh, how many times is that in there? She scrolled farther. 4 entries. Maybe 5. Family reports increased confusion. Family concerned about memory. Family reports missed medication. I stared at her. You knew? Knew what? That Derek and Melissa thought I was losing my mind. Her expression hardened, not with anger exactly, but with concentration. Ken, slow down. I'm looking at your notes. You're looking at information reported to this office. That's different? Yes, very. I almost laughed. For the first time since Noah spoke, I felt foolish. Maybe Dr. Carter had believed them all along. Maybe every time I sat in this room complaining about sleep or blood pressure, she had been watching me for signs that Derek was right. She turned the monitor slightly toward me. Look at the next section. Under the family note was her recommendation. Independent cognitive assessment advised. Then another entry 2 months later. Assessment not completed. Family reports scheduling conflict. Another. Family requested postponement due to patient fatigue. I read that twice. I never asked to postpone anything. I know. How do you know? Because I called you once afterward, and you sounded surprised there had been an appointment." A memory stirred. Melissa had told me Dr. Carter wanted to wait until I was sleeping better. I had accepted it. Who canceled? Dr. Carter clicked through the messages. Some calls came from Melissa. One came from Derek. One was through the patient portal. I don't use the portal. I know that too. The room seemed suddenly smaller. Dr. Carter took off her glasses. I've been trying to get an independent baseline because family reports and actual medical findings are not the same thing. I looked down at the bag. What about this? She pulled up an older medication list. There it was, a medication I had taken during Marilyn's last winter, when I could barely sleep more than 3 hours at a time. "I remember this," I said. "You didn't tolerate it well. Why did we stop? You complained of morning grogginess. You were slower, forgetful, sometimes confused about conversations from the night before." My fingertips went numb. "When did you discontinue it?" She gave me the date. "More than 9 months ago." I wrote it down. Could this be the same thing? It resembles it, but I won't confirm that without proper identification. Fair enough. I appreciated that answer. She was not giving me the conclusion I wanted. She was giving me what she could support. I handed her my log. She read quietly. "You're still documenting mistakes?" "Yes." "Good. You don't think that proves something's wrong?" "I think forgetting coffee with a friend proves you forgot coffee with a friend." I almost smiled. Then I showed her the printed email from Derek's folder. "Dad, capacity questions." She read it once and sighed. "Ken, Derek contacted this office more than once. About my memory? At first. And later?" She hesitated. That frightened me more than anything else she had said. "What did he ask?" Dr. Carter turned fully toward me. "Your son wasn't asking how to improve your memory. He was asking what happens if you lose control of your money." Dr. Carter's last sentence followed me home like a warning I could not shake. My son had not been asking how to help me remember things. He had been asking what would happen if I could no longer control my own money. I found Noah at the kitchen table with Frank Dawson, an old friend from my inspection days. They were sanding the edge of a small birdhouse Frank had brought over to keep him busy. Frank looked at me when I came through the door, saw something in my face, and did not ask questions in front of the boy. "Everything all right? I need to go through some paperwork." He gave me a slow nod. After Frank left, I made Noah lunch and carried the blue folder into my office. I started with the document that gave Derek access to my finances. There was nothing mysterious about how he got it. I gave it to him. During Marilyn's final illness, there were days when I could barely remember whether I had eaten breakfast, much less whether the insurance premium had cleared. Derek offered to handle bills while I drove Marilyn to treatments and sat beside her through hospital stays. The durable financial power of attorney had seemed practical, necessary, even. I signed it because Derek was my son, and because, at that point in my life, I would have trusted him with anything. The paper gave him legal authority to handle certain financial matters for me. It did not give him ownership of my money. I laid it on the left side of my desk. Then I opened the documents for my revocable living trust. I had created the trust after Marilyn died. My attorney had suggested it because I wanted things orderly if something ever happened to me. I was still the trustee. I still controlled everything. Derek was named as successor trustee only if I became unable to manage my own financial affairs. I read that section twice. Then a third time. The trust required written opinions from 2 independent physicians before Derek could step into my place. My eyes went to the legal pad beside me. Family reports increased confusion. Independent cognitive assessment advised. Derek asking Dr. Carter about what happened if I could no longer manage money. My stomach tightened. I reached for the desk calendar. Melissa had made an appointment for me the following Thursday. She had called it routine. "Just one of those things they recommend when you get older, Dad." At the time, I had rolled my eyes and agreed. Now, the words written beside Thursday morning seemed much heavier. Cognitive evaluation. I sat there for a while, looking between the calendar and the trust. It would have been easy to decide I had found the whole answer. Derek needed doctors to declare me incapable. Melissa had been documenting my mistakes. The appointment was already scheduled. Case closed. Except that was not how I had spent 36 years doing inspections. A suspicious pattern was not the same thing as proof. I needed dates, records, things that still meant the same thing after my anger cooled down. So I kept going through the folder. Behind the trust were several old bank statements. I almost skipped them. Then I noticed Derek's business name, Walker Residential Renovations. There was a transfer from my account. I looked at the amount, then the notation, family loan, M approved. I stopped breathing for a second. M. Maryland. A second transfer appeared a few weeks later. Almost the same amount. Samnotation. M approved. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time since Noah warned me about the medicine, doubt moved in the other direction. Maybe I was wrong about Derek. Marilyn had helped him before. She had always been more generous when his business hit trouble. When Derek bought his first work truck, Marilyn had been the one who convinced me to help him with the down payment. He's building something, she had told me. Give him room. Maybe these transfers were exactly what they appeared to be. Loans. Approved by my wife. I felt ashamed of the relief that came with the thought. Part of me wanted an innocent explanation badly enough to grab the first one I saw. I carried one statement into the kitchen. Noah was drawing while he ate apple slices. I placed the statement beside my legal pad and began writing down the date. Noah's pencil stopped. His eyes had fixed on the page. You recognize something? He nodded. I pointed at Derek's company name. That? Another nod. I did not ask whether his father stole money. I did not ask whether his mother knew about it. He was 8 years old. What do you remember? Noah stared at the statement. Then his eyes moved toward the hallway. Grandma. What about Grandma? His fingers tightened around the pencil. She got mad. At your dad? He nodded. What did she say? Noah's face pinched with concentration. I waited. Finally, he whispered, Grandma told Dad, no more. I leaned toward him. No more what? He shook his head. I don't know. I waited. That was harder than it sounds. Every part of me wanted to keep asking until I understood what Marilyn had meant. No more money? No more loans? No more helping Derek? But Noah was 8 years old, and whatever had happened 2 years earlier had already cost him enough. So I folded the bank statement and set it aside. That's okay, I said. You don't have to know. His shoulders loosened a little. I pushed the bowl of apple slices closer to him. You said Grandma got mad. Do you remember why? He stared at the table. For several seconds, there was nothing. Then he whispered, Dad said something. What did he say? I don't know. Another honest answer. I nodded. What happened after you heard him? Noah rubbed the eraser end of his pencil against the table. I told Grandma. That was the first piece that landed differently. You told her what your dad said? A small nod. About money? He nodded again. I tried to remember Marilyn's final months. There had been arguments I never fully understood. She and Derek had always been close, but near the end there were days when he would leave the house tight-jawed and quiet. I had blamed stress. Cancer made everything feel like stress. What happened when you told Grandma? Noah pressed his lips together. She called Dad. And then? They yelled. His voice became thinner. I stopped asking. He was looking toward the hallway now, but I could tell he wasn't seeing my house the way it looked that morning. He was seeing something older, something a 6-year-old had carried alone. I kept my voice low. You didn't make them argue. He looked at me. You told Grandma something you heard. What the adults did with it was their responsibility. He did not answer. I had the feeling the words were reaching him, but not yet settling. After Marilyn died, Noah had still spoken for a little while. I remembered that clearly now. At the funeral, he had asked me why everybody kept bringing casseroles when Grandma wasn't there to eat them. A month later, he still said goodnight. Then the sentences became shorter, then single words, then almost nothing. At the time, we all thought grief had closed him down. Maybe grief had only been part of it. Noah, I said, did somebody tell you not to talk? His eyes widened. I regretted the question immediately. No, forget that. You don't have to answer. But he shook his head. No? Another shake. Nobody had ordered him to be silent. That somehow hurt worse. He picked up a green pencil and rolled it between his fingers. Then he whispered, Mom got mad. When? After Grandma died? He nodded. What happened? His brow tightened. I said what Dad said. What did your dad say? I don't know. Again, not a convenient little witness with perfect memory, just a child remembering fear. I waited. Noah finally said, Mom said I repeat everything. My chest tightened. What else? He swallowed. She said repeating things makes everything worse. I closed my eyes for a moment. I could hear Melissa saying it, not like a movie villain threatening a child, like an exhausted mother, angry and frightened, saying something careless that a 6-year-old might take as law. And your dad? Noah looked down. He said Grandma was sick. That's true. He said she shouldn't get upset. There it was. I leaned back in my chair. Noah had told Marilyn something. Marilyn confronted Derek. There was an argument. Marilyn, already terribly ill, went back to the hospital sometime after that, and then she died. A 6-year-old boy had put those events together in the only way he knew how. I watched him pick at a scratch in the tabletop. Do you think Grandma got sicker because you talked? He did not nod. He did not shake his head. His eyes filled instead. That was answer enough. I moved my chair closer, but I did not touch him until he leaned into me first. Then I put one arm around his shoulders. Noah, listen to me. He stayed very still. Grandma had cancer. She was very sick before that argument, before anything you said. Nothing you told her caused her illness. He wiped his cheek with his sleeve. You understand? A tiny shrug. I knew better than to expect 2 years of guilt to disappear because Grandpa said the right sentence once. So I gave him something simpler. You did not hurt Grandma. His breathing changed. That was not your fault. He pressed his face against my shirt. For a long while, neither of us spoke. And for once, the silence did not feel like something dangerous. Eventually, Noah pulled away. He went back to his chair and picked up his pencil. I thought we were finished. Then he looked at the folded bank statement. His eyes moved toward my office. Grandma, he said. What about her? He hesitated. Then he looked straight at me. Grandma wrote things down. The words sent me straight back to the last year of Marilyn's life. She had always been a note-taker. Grocery lists on the backs of envelopes, doctor questions in the margins of magazines, recipes with substitutions written beside them because she could never leave a recipe alone. If something mattered, Marilyn usually put it on paper. What did she write in? I asked Noah. He frowned. A book? What color? He looked around the kitchen, then reached for one of his pencils. Yellow. That was enough. I knew exactly what he meant. Marilyn had kept a small yellow notebook during her treatments. I remembered seeing it beside her chair, but I had assumed it held medication schedules and questions for the oncologist. After she died, I packed most of her things myself. Some went into boxes, some stayed exactly where she left them, because moving them felt too much like admitting she was not coming back. I started in the bedroom. Nothing. Then her sewing cabinet. Nothing there either. I checked the drawer beside the telephone where she used to keep stamps, coupons, and 3 pens that never worked. No yellow notebook. For nearly an hour, Noah followed me from room to room without saying anything. Then I opened the pantry. On the top shelf sat Marilyn's old wooden recipe box. I almost laughed at myself. Of course, I brought it down and set it on the kitchen table. The box smelled faintly of cinnamon and old paper. Inside were recipes I had eaten for 40 years. Pot roast, lemon pie, chicken casserole. Her handwriting seemed to fill the room faster than any photograph could have. I had to stop for a moment when I found the card for Noah's favorite oatmeal cookies. Beside the recipe, Marilyn had written, "Less cinnamon for Noah." I rubbed my thumb across the words. Then I saw yellow beneath a stack of index cards. The notebook. Noah's eyes moved to it immediately. This one? He nodded. I opened the cover. The first pages were exactly what I expected. Blood pressure numbers, doctor appointments, questions about nausea medication, a grocery reminder to buy Ken the coffee he actually likes instead of that terrible cheap stuff. I smiled despite myself. Then, about halfway through, the entries changed. Derek called. Business slow again. 2 days later, talked to Ken. We can help Derek temporarily. My heartbeat slowed. I turned the page. Loan to Derek. He says, payroll issue. 8,000. Must repay when contract closes. There was a date. It matched the first transfer in the bank statement. I checked twice. Then, the next entry. Second loan. 5,000. I agreed. Ken exhausted. We'll explain details later. That matched too. He sat back. For several minutes, I did nothing. The first 2 transfers were legitimate. Marilyn had approved them, maybe even arranged them. A strange relief moved through me, followed immediately by shame. I had spent days wondering whether my son had been taking money behind our backs. And here was my wife, in her own handwriting, proving that at least some of it had been given willingly. Maybe grief had made me suspicious. Maybe Noah's warning about the pill had caused me to start seeing a conspiracy everywhere. Maybe Derek had simply borrowed money from his mother during a difficult year, and I was turning a family loan into something uglier because I was frightened. I closed the notebook. For a few seconds, I actually thought about calling him. I could hear myself saying it. Derek, I found Mom's notes. I misunderstood those transfers. That old instinct came rushing back. Fix the argument. Apologize first. Keep the family intact. My hand was already moving toward my phone when I stopped. There were more pages. I had spent 36 years telling property owners the same thing. You do not stop an inspection when you find the answer you hoped for. So I opened the notebook again. A few pages later, Marilyn's handwriting became shakier. Derek asked again, Told him we cannot keep covering company shortages. Then, he says next contract will fix everything. And finally, under a date less than 2 weeks before her final hospitalization, told Derek no more until he repays what he already owes. I read the sentence aloud without meaning to. Noah looked up. No more. Yes. He recognized the words. I turned immediately to the bank statements. The first loan matched. The second matched. Then Marilyn's note. No more. I ran my finger down the later transactions. Another transfer appeared 3 weeks after that entry. Same company. Similar description. Family help. Another came the following month. By then, Marilyn had been too sick to manage much of anything beyond getting through the day. There were more after she entered the hospital, and at least one after she died. I put the notebook beside the statements and lined up the dates. The first money wasn't stolen. The money that came after Marilyn said no more was another story entirely. I spent the rest of that afternoon doing something I had done hundreds of times for the city. I built a timeline, not a story, not an accusation, a timeline. I put Marilyn's yellow notebook on my left, the bank statements on my right, and my legal pad in the middle. The first transfer to Derek's company was easy, $8,000. Marilyn had written exactly why she approved it. Payroll trouble. Temporary loan. The second was $5,000. Same thing. Her handwriting was right there. Then came the line that changed everything. Told Derek no more until he repays what he already owes. I underlined the date. After that, the transfers kept coming. $6,000, $4,500, $7,000. The descriptions barely changed. Family loan, temporary help, business support. If somebody looked at the bank statements without Marilyn's notebook, they might assume the arrangement simply continued. That was what bothered me. Derek had not invented a new pattern. He had taken an old, legitimate one and kept using it after the permission behind it was gone. I checked each date against Marilyn's medical calendar. One transfer happened while she was receiving treatment. Another came 4 days after she had been admitted to the hospital. A third arrived after she was home on hospice. By then, Marilyn needed help walking from the bedroom to the bathroom. I could not imagine her sitting up with Derek discussing another business loan. Still, imagination was not evidence. So I marked those transfers. Needs verification. The first 2 went into a separate column. Approved. That distinction mattered to me. I was angry, but I did not want anger doing the arithmetic. By early evening, I had gone through more than a year of records. Some payments Derek made from my accounts were perfectly reasonable. Property taxes, insurance, a plumbing repair, 2 hospital bills Marilyn and I had asked him to handle. I marked every one of them legitimate. Then I made another list. Money transferred to Derek's business after Marilyn's no more entry. Personal expenses I could not connect to anything I had approved. Reimbursements with no receipt in the folder. The questionable amount grew, but I refused to add $1 unless I could explain why it was there. Noah sat across from me with a coloring book. Every so often I looked at him and wondered how many adult conversations had happened around that child, because everyone believed silence meant absence. He caught me watching. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded. I went back to the records. One thing became clear before dinner. Melissa did not appear anywhere in the early financial timeline. Not once. The questionable transfers had started while Marilyn was still alive. Melissa did not begin filling my weekly pill organizer until months after the funeral. I remembered exactly how that started. I had mixed up 2 evening bottles during one of those awful weeks when sleep came in pieces. Melissa had found me standing at the kitchen counter trying to remember which tablet I had already taken. "Let me do this for you, Dad," she had said. And she had. Every Sunday she filled the organizer. At first, I had been grateful. That memory made the situation harder, not easier, because it meant Melissa probably had not walked into my house with some grand plan from the beginning. She had helped me, then something changed. I looked at the dates again. Derek's transfers first. Melissa managing my medication later. Dad incidents later still. Whatever the whole truth was, one thing was becoming difficult to deny. My son crossed the financial line before his wife ever touched my pills. Melissa may have discovered what he was doing later. Maybe she told herself he would pay it back. Maybe she believed helping him meant helping the family. I could not know what she told herself. What I did know was what happened after she had the chance to stop. She didn't. I wrote that carefully too. Do not assume motive. Establish actions. That sentence came straight out of my old inspection notebook. At 7, I heated tomato soup and made grilled cheese for Noah. He ate quietly while I continued sorting transactions. Then I found one that did not fit. It was larger than the usual household expenses, but smaller than Derek's business transfers. The recipient was unfamiliar. VCSL Holdings. No invoice. No note from Maryland. No receipt. I searched the blue folder. Nothing. I checked my email. Nothing there either. The payment had gone out 6 weeks earlier. I circled it. Grandpa? I looked up. Noah pointed at my sandwich. I had forgotten to eat it. For 1 second, I almost laughed. Then I wrote that down too. Forgot dinner while reviewing records. Real mistake. No excuse. After Noah went to wash his hands, I pulled out my phone and searched the name attached to the payment. The first result did not look like a contract. It did not look like Derek's company. It was a retirement community on the north side of Columbus. I stared at the screen. Then I read the full name. Willow Creek Senior Living. I looked back at the transaction. The payment wasn't to Derek's company. It had gone to a place called Willow Creek Senior Living. I did not call Willow Creek that night. Every instinct in me wanted to. I wanted to know why my money had gone to a senior living community I had never contacted, but the payment had already been made 6 weeks earlier. Whatever it meant would still be there tomorrow. The access Derek had to my finances was a different matter. That could be used again. By Friday morning, the 7th day of Derek and Melissa's vacation, I had arranged my records across the kitchen table in order. Marilyn's yellow notebook, the bank statements, the list titled Dad Incidents, my medication log, copies of the power of attorney and my trust, and my own timeline, written in the same plain language I used for inspection reports. Noah sat nearby eating cereal. I looked at the stack and realized something had changed during that week. A few days earlier, I would have called Derek before doing anything important, not because I needed his permission, because I had grown accustomed to giving him the chance to explain me out of my own concerns. That morning, I did not call him. I called my estate attorney. Thomas Reed had helped me create the trust after Marilyn died. He was a few years younger than I was, gray-haired, careful with his words, and almost impossible to rush. When I told him I needed to see him before the weekend, he found an opening that afternoon. Frank agreed to stay with Noah again. Before I left, Noah watched me put the blue folder into my briefcase. Grandpa? I turned. He pointed at it. I'm keeping it with me. He nodded. That small gesture felt more important than it should have. Thomas did not interrupt while I explained. I told him what I knew. Then I told him what I did not know. I did not say Derek had stolen every dollar. I showed him the loans Marilyn approved and the transfers that came afterward. I did not say Melissa had poisoned me. I showed him the discontinued medication, my current pharmacy list, and Dr. Carter's notes. I did not say I had dementia. I showed him my missed coffee appointment and every genuine mistake I had written down myself. When I finished, Thomas leaned back. You've done more separating fact from suspicion than most people manage when they're angry. I inspected buildings for 36 years. I remember. He tapped the durable financial power of attorney. This is the first thing I'd address. I want Derek's authority revoked. Thomas studied me. Are you sure? The old version of me almost answered with an explanation. Instead, I said, yes. That was enough. He prepared the documents necessary to revoke Derek's financial authority. We also discussed notifying the institutions where Derek had been acting for me. Then we moved to the trust. Derek was still named successor trustee. I looked at his name on the page longer than I expected. When I created the trust, putting him there had felt almost ceremonial. My son, the person who would step in if I could not. Now the same words look different. I want him removed as automatic successor. Thomas nodded. We can amend that while you retain capacity. I don't want another family member replacing him. We discussed an independent successor instead. Someone whose job would be to follow the trust, not inherit my family arguments. That appealed to me. Not because I had stopped loving Derek, because love was exactly what had made the arrangement dangerous. By the time we finished, my hand ached from signing papers. I had expected relief. What I felt was grief. There is something strange about protecting yourself from your own child. You spend years checking doors because you are afraid danger might get into the house. Nobody prepares you for the day you realize you once handed danger a key because it had your last name. Before leaving Thomas's office, I made 2 more calls. The first was to the financial institutions holding my accounts. I followed the process Thomas had explained and arranged for Derek's access to be removed where appropriate. The second was to Dr. Carter's office. I want the cognitive evaluation, I told the receptionist. The one scheduled for next Thursday? Yes, but I want all appointment communication to come directly to me. She confirmed my phone number and email. No changes through family unless I authorize them. I'll add that note. For the first time, the evaluation did not frighten me. If there was something wrong with my memory, I wanted to know. But I wanted the truth, not Derek's version of it. When I stepped into the parking lot, the late afternoon sun hit my face. I stood beside my truck and let myself enjoy one quiet thought. My accounts were mine again. My trust was mine again. My medical decisions were mine again. Nothing had been proven about Willow Creek. Nothing had been settled with Derek, but I had taken back the first things I never should have surrendered so casually. My phone rang. Derek. I looked at his name and almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered, "Hello?" He did not say hello back. "Dad, what the hell did you just do to us?" The word us caught me first. Not me. Not why. Us. "I changed some financial arrangements," I said. "You revoked my power of attorney." "Yes. You removed me from the trust. I changed the successor trustee." "Why?" "I think that conversation should happen when you're home." There was a long breath on the other end. "We're already driving back." Then he hung up. They arrived shortly after 7 that evening. Noah was in the living room with a book when Derek came through the front door. Melissa followed with her purse still over her shoulder. Neither of them mentioned the vacation. Derek dropped his keys on the table. "What happened to you this week?" I stayed seated. "I started checking things." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting until you sit down." Melissa looked toward Noah. "Sweetheart, why don't you go pack your things?" Noah did not move. "He can stay," I said. Derek's face tightened. "No, he doesn't need to hear this." "For once," I agreed. "Noah, take your book to my bedroom for a little while." He looked at me. I nodded. Only after the door closed did Derek start again. "You canceled my access to your accounts without even talking to me." "I didn't cancel your accounts. I canceled your access to mine." Melissa exhaled sharply. "This is exactly what we've been worried about." I looked at her. "What is?" "The suspicion, the sudden decisions, thinking people are against you." Derek folded his arms. "You stopped taking medicine, then you changed legal documents overnight." "Dad, listen to yourself." That sentence might have worked a week earlier. I placed my yellow legal pad on the table. "I have been listening to myself. I've also been checking dates." Melissa's eyes dropped to the pad. I reached into the blue folder and removed the pharmacy list. "This medication was discontinued months ago." Her expression changed. "Barely, but I saw it." "I know what you're talking about," she said. "Good. Then tell me why it was in my pill organizer." "You weren't sleeping." "So?" "You were exhausted. You were getting confused because you were exhausted. You took that medication before and it helped you sleep. It also made me groggy and confused." Her mouth tightened. I was trying to help. "Did Dr. Carter tell you to restart it?" Silence. "Did any doctor?" "No." "Did you tell Dr. Carter you were giving it to me?" Melissa looked at Derek. That was answer enough. Derek stepped forward. "Dad, Melissa has been taking care of you for months. Don't turn one mistake into some criminal conspiracy." "I didn't call it that." "You're acting like it." I pulled out the bank statements. His anger shifted immediately. "You went through all that too?" "They're my records." Derek stared at the papers. I placed Marilyn's yellow notebook beside them. For the first time since he entered the house, he stopped moving. "Mom's notebook?" "Yes." His eyes remained on it. "She approved those loans." "The first 2. I told you she did." "You never told me anything." "She wanted to help my business." "She did." I opened the notebook to the marked page. "And then she wrote that there would be no more until you repaid what you already owed." Derek's jaw worked. Mom knew the business was struggling. That isn't the same as permission. She would have helped me. Would have is not did. His voice rose. "You know how she was with me." "Yes, I do." "That's why I marked the first 2 loans as legitimate." He blinked. I pushed my handwritten timeline toward him. "I'm not accusing you of taking every dollar that ever moved through my accounts. Taxes are marked legitimate. Insurance is legitimate. The hospital bills are legitimate. The loans Marilyn approved are legitimate. I tapped the later transfers. These are the ones I'm asking about." Melissa sat down slowly. "Derek did not." "You're really going to do this?" he said. "After everything Mom wanted for this family?" There it was, Marilyn. For 2 years, her name had been the easiest way to make me surrender an argument. She wanted us together. She would have helped. She wouldn't want conflict. I closed the notebook. "Your mother wanted to help you. She did not give you permission forever. You don't know what she would have wanted. Neither do you." He reached toward the papers. I put my hand over them. "Those stay with me." His face went red. "I'm your son, and these are my documents." Melissa suddenly stood. This is ridiculous. We have spent months trying to plan ahead because you refuse to admit you need help. Plan what? She stopped. Derek turned toward her. Melissa. But I had heard it. What exactly have you been planning? No one is trying to hurt you, she said. That wasn't my question. Derek stepped between us. Dad, drop it. I looked directly at Melissa. Planning what? Her face flushed. We were trying to make sure there were options if things got worse. What options? Derek said her name again, sharper this time. Melissa snapped. We already had the house appraised. The entire room went silent. Melissa's admission stayed in the room long after nobody spoke. Derek looked at her as if she had broken something. I looked at him. When? He rubbed a hand over his face. Dad, it wasn't like that. That wasn't my question. Melissa sat back down. It was just information, she said. We needed to know what the house was worth. They? Neither answered. I gathered my papers and put them back into the blue folder. You're leaving now. Derek stared at me. You're kicking us out? You don't live here. That landed harder than I expected. For years, I had allowed Derek to speak about my house, as if it already belonged partly to him. Not that night. They took Noah home. I watched his face as he left, but I did not ask him to choose between us. Whatever happened next belonged to the adults. The following morning, I began with the appraisal. There was only one realtor I could remember seeing around the house recently, a woman named Janet Collins. I found her business card in a drawer beside the telephone. When I called, I gave her my name and address. There was a pause. Yes, Mr. Walker. I remember the property. Have you been inside my house? Another pause. Yes. When? She gave me a date. I checked my calendar. Cardiology appointment. Melissa had driven me that morning. Who let you in? Your son met me there. What did he tell you? Her voice became cautious. He said you were considering a transition and that he expected to be managing the property soon. I understood that you were aware of the valuation. I wasn't. I'm sorry. Suongmi. I did not blame her. She had walked through a house with the owner's adult son holding a key and speaking confidently. People believed confidence. I had done it myself. After the call, I walked through my own living room and tried to imagine strangers measuring it. The fireplace Marilyn chose. The dining room where Noah had learned to eat with a spoon. The bedroom where my wife spent her final weeks. Reduced to square footage. Market value. Potential listing price. That was when I remembered the brochures. Melissa had brought them over months earlier. Just looking ahead, she had said. Retirement communities. Assisted living. Places with smiling, gray-haired couples sitting beneath flowering trees. I had laughed. I'm not moving anywhere. Nobody said you were. She had left the brochures anyway. I found them in a magazine basket. Willow Creek was among them. One page was folded open to pictures of apartments overlooking a courtyard garden. I remembered Melissa asking me a question while she made coffee. If you ever did move somewhere smaller, would you rather look at a parking lot or a garden? I had answered without thinking. Garden, obviously. At the time, it sounded like conversation. Now I sat holding that brochure and felt sick. I called Willow Creek. A receptionist transferred me to someone in resident services. My name is Kenneth Walker. I believe a payment was made in my name. She asked for identifying information, then placed me on hold. When she returned, her tone was polite. Yes, Mr. Walker, there is a preliminary priority reservation connected to your name. I never made one. It was described as planning for a possible future move. By whom? I have Derek Walker listed as the family contact. My hand tightened around the phone. How much was paid? She told me. It matched the transaction from my account. What exactly does the payment do? It holds priority consideration for future availability. It does not obligate you to move here. That distinction mattered. They had not signed me into a facility. They had not legally committed me to anything, but they had used my money to place me in line. Was there a preference listed? Yes. I already knew the answer. Garden view. I closed my eyes. After the call, I laid everything across the kitchen table. The appraisal date, the trust language about incapacity, the dad incidents list, the postponed cognitive assessments, the appointment Melissa had called routine, the payment to Willow Creek. For days, each piece had seemed separate. Now the plan was simple enough that I did not need to dramatize it. Build a record that Dad was declining. Get the medical findings needed to activate the trust provision. Let Derek take over management. Know what the house was worth before that happened. Have a place ready for me if moving me out became convenient. Maybe Derek would claim every step was meant to help. Maybe Melissa would call it planning ahead. That did not change the part that mattered. No one had asked me. They had discussed my mind, my home, my money, and my future as if I were already absent from all four. I stared at the Willow Creek brochure. They hadn't just been preparing to take control of my house. They had already spent my money preparing the place they expected to send me. By Sunday afternoon, I discovered that taking back control of my money did not mean I had taken back control of the story. My sister called first. "Ken, Derek says you stopped taking your medicine." I stopped taking one pill that was no longer prescribed to me. That's not how he explained it. Of course it wasn't. According to Derek, I had suddenly become suspicious of everyone. I had refused medication, cut my own son off from accounts he had managed for years, changed my trust without warning, and started accusing him and Melissa of stealing from me. Every sentence contained enough truth to survive being repeated. That was what made it effective. I had stopped taking a pill. I had closed Derek's access. I had changed my trust. I did believe money had been taken without permission. What Derek left out were the dates, the discontinued prescription, Marilyn's notebook, the later transfers, the appraisal, Willow Creek. Without those pieces, I sounded exactly like the frightened old man he had been describing. My cousin Robert called next, then Marilyn's younger sister. Neither accused me directly. That almost made it worse. They used careful voices. "Maybe don't make any permanent decisions right now. Derek loves you. Melissa has done a lot for you. Could everyone just sit down when you're calmer?" By evening, I stopped answering. I sat alone at my kitchen table with Marilyn's notebook beside me and understood something I had never learned during 36 years of inspections. Facts could protect your property. They could protect your money. They could not stop people from choosing the version of a story that made them most comfortable. For the first time since the week began, I felt truly alone. Then Derek called. I nearly ignored him. I answered because I hoped Noah might be beside him. "Dad." His voice was calmer than it had been in my living room. "What do you want?" "We need to talk about Noah." Everything inside me tightened. "Is he all right?" "He's struggling." "With what?" "With all of this." I sat straighter. "What does that mean?" "He barely slept last night. Melissa says he's withdrawn again. He's confused about what you've been telling him." "I haven't been telling him accusations. You've been asking him questions about us." I asked him what he remembered. "He's 8. I know exactly how old he is." Derek sighed. "That's my point. He shouldn't be involved." For once, we agreed. He shouldn't have been involved in any of this. There was a pause. Then Derek said, "I think he needs some distance from you for a while." The words were so quiet I almost missed what they meant. Distance. Until things settle down. What things? Until you stop filling his head with this idea that Melissa and I are doing something to you. I stood from the table. "Is that why I can't see him?" "I didn't say you can't see him. You said distance." "Dad, don't turn everything into a threat." There it was again. A sentence that made me question whether I had heard the sentence before it correctly. I walked to the window. Across the yard sat the old swing Marilyn had bought for Noah when he was 4. I remembered him sitting there 2 days earlier, speaking in pieces because full sentences still frightened him. "What do you want me to do, Derek?" His answer came slowly. "Stop this." "Stop what?" "The accusations. The lawyer. Going through old bank statements. Telling people Melissa gave you something dangerous. She gave me a medication my doctor had discontinued. She was trying to help you sleep." "And Willow Creek?" Silence. "The appraisal?" Another silence. Then he said, "We were planning ahead because somebody had to." I closed my eyes. There was no direct offer. He never said, "Give me back the power of attorney and I'll give you Noah." He was smarter than that. But the bargain sat between us anyway. Be quiet. Stop checking. Stop challenging us. Then perhaps life could return to normal. Perhaps Grandpa could see Noah again. "I miss him," I said. Derek's voice softened immediately. "I know. That nearly broke me. For one weak moment, I wanted to tell him I was done. Keep the money. Forget the transfers. Forget the appraisal. Put his name back wherever he wanted it." I had lost Marilyn. The thought of losing Noah too felt unbearable. My mouth actually opened. Then I remembered a 6-year-old boy hearing adults argue because he had repeated something true. I remembered Melissa saying that repeating things made everything worse. I remembered Derek saying Grandma should not have been upset while she was sick. And I remembered what Noah had learned from all of it. Talking hurt people. Silence kept love safe. If I surrendered now, what would I be teaching him? That his parents had been right. That when truth threatens the family, the person who speaks must be the one who gives something up. I sat back down. "I love Noah," I said. "I know you do, and I'm not going to use him against you." "Then stop involving him." I will never interrogate him. I will never ask him to choose sides. But I am not going to pretend I didn't find what I found just so you'll let me see my grandson." Derek's voice hardened. "That's your choice. No, keeping him away is yours." He hung up. I stayed at the kitchen table long after the screen went dark. It hurt more than losing control of an account ever could. But for the first time, I understood exactly where my line was. If I bought my grandson back with silence, I would be proving to him that silence really was the price of being loved. The cognitive evaluation was on Thursday morning. For most of the week, I had told myself I was ready for it. That was not entirely true. I had spent days proving that Derek and Melissa had distorted parts of my life, but there was still one possibility I could not cross out with a pen. Maybe some of their concern had been real. Maybe I was getting worse in ways I could not see from inside my own head. That frightened me more than the money. Dr. Carter had arranged for the assessment to be done independently. I drove myself there, carried my medication list and my yellow log, and told the woman at the front desk that all communication was to come directly to me. Nobody from my family came along. For once, I wanted no one answering for me. The evaluation took most of the morning. There were questions about dates, words to remember, simple calculations, shapes to copy, stories to repeat, and practical questions about how I handled bills and appointments. Some things came easily, others did not. At one point, I was given several words and asked to recall them later. I remembered most, but not all. Another task took me longer than I thought it should. I felt heat rise into my face. The examiner noticed. "Mr. Walker, taking longer does not mean failing. I used to remember permit numbers after seeing them once. You were also not 68 then." I almost laughed. When it was over, I went home exhausted and tried not to turn every difficult question into a verdict. The results came 2 days later. Dr. Carter asked me to come in so we could review them together. I sat across from her while she explained the report in ordinary English. My recall was slower than it had probably been when I was younger. I had some normal age-related weaknesses, especially when I was tired or under stress. But there was no finding that justified taking away my ability to make decisions. No recommendation that somebody else control my finances. No conclusion that I could not live independently. I read that part twice. "So I'm fine?" Dr. Carter tilted her head. "That is not what I said." I smiled despite myself. "Of course not. You are getting older, Ken. You may forget appointments. You may misplace things. You may need lists and calendars more than you did 20 years ago. I already do. That is called adapting." Then she turned to the medication section. Since I had stopped taking the old discontinued medication and returned to the current medication plan under her supervision, the heavy morning grogginess had eased. My log supported that. But she was careful. "That does not mean every memory problem came from the medication." "I know. Good. That mattered to me. I did not need a pill to explain every mistake. I had forgotten Frank's coffee appointment without it. I had put the garbage out on the wrong night. I had lost my keys. Those things were mine. What I no longer accepted was the idea that a mistake transferred ownership of my life to somebody else. I looked down at my hands. They were older hands than the ones that had held Derek when he was born. The skin was thinner, the knuckles were larger. I was not going backward. There would probably come a day when I needed more help than I needed now. But needing help and losing the right to choose were not the same thing. That distinction felt almost embarrassingly obvious. Yet I had spent 2 years slowly surrendering small decisions because fighting about them seemed harder than letting Derek handle things. I had called it keeping peace. Now I understood that peace without choice was only quiet. When I left Dr. Carter's office, I did not feel 20 years younger. I felt 68, and for the first time in a long while, that was enough. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home and bought coffee filters because Melissa had been right about one thing. I really was almost out. That made me laugh in aisle 6. Truth did not have to belong entirely to one side. My phone rang that evening while I was washing a coffee mug. "Derek." I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello, Dad." His voice was different, controlled, almost careful. "What is it? I heard you did the evaluation." "I did. And the results are between me and my doctor." He paused. "Okay, that surprised me." Then he said, "I just think there are things you need to understand before this goes any further." I dried my hands and sat at the kitchen table. "What things?" Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice had that familiar tone people used when they wanted to sound reluctant about saying something they had called specifically to say. "Dad, You need to understand something. Melissa was the one handling your pills. Derek's attempt to separate himself from Melissa made one thing clear. If I let them control the next conversation, they would spend it deciding which one of them should carry the blame. So I arranged the meeting myself. Thomas Reed let us use his conference room the following Tuesday. I told Derek and Melissa that if they wanted to discuss money, the house, or my future, they could do it there. Noah would not be present. I arrived first with the blue folder that had frightened me weeks earlier. This time, it was in my hands for a different reason. When Derek and Melissa entered, they sat apart. Thomas stayed at the end of the table. He would answer legal questions if needed, but the explanation was mine. I opened Marilyn's yellow notebook. The first 2 loans to Derek's business were legitimate, I said. Marilyn approved them. Then I read the line she had written later. Told Derek no more until he repays what he already owes. I placed the later bank statements beside it. These transfers happened afterward. Derek started to speak. You'll get your turn. For once, he stopped. I moved to the medication records. This was discontinued because it left me groggy and confused. Melissa put it back into my organizer without telling me or my doctor. Melissa looked down. Then came the incident list. Some entries were true. I lost keys. I forgot things. Others left out important facts. I placed my corrected timeline beside it. While those incidents were being collected, questions were being asked about whether I could manage my finances. My cognitive assessments were delayed. My house was appraised without my knowledge. And money from my account went to Willow Creek to hold priority for a place I never asked to live. Nobody spoke. This is not one misunderstanding. It is a sequence. Derek leaned forward. Dad, I told you, the medication was Melissa's thing. I wasn't filling your pill box. Melissa's head came up. Excuse me? I'm saying I didn't know exactly what you were giving him. She stared at him, then laughed once without humor. Don't do that, Derek. I'm not doing anything. You're trying to make this all mine. Her face hardened. You were taking his money before I ever touched that pill box. The room went still. I did not feel triumphant. The sentence only confirmed what the dates had already shown me. Derek turned toward me. The business was drowning. You should have told me. You would have said no. Then you had your answer. He pushed back from the table. You don't understand what I was trying to save. I understand what you decided you were entitled to use. His face changed. That money was going to be mine someday anyway. There it was. Not confusion. Not caregiving. Entitlement. I looked at my son. Someday isn't today, and inheritance isn't permission. Then I told them what would happen next. I would not put another dollar into Derek's company. The unauthorized transfers I had documented would be repaid under a written agreement Thomas had prepared. Derek could sell equipment, reduce expenses, renegotiate debt, or shrink the business. How he saved his company was his responsibility. Melissa would no longer manage my medication, appointments, medical communication, or finances. Neither of them would have a key to my house without my permission. I was not cutting them out of my life forever, but access to me would no longer mean authority over me. Derek signed the repayment agreement 2 weeks later. His company survived, but smaller. He sold 1 truck, gave up an expensive office lease, and stopped waiting for the next contract to rescue every bad decision. Melissa apologized. I accepted the words, but I did not restore the privileges. Trust was not something an apology could demand back. Months passed. I stayed in my house because I chose to. I started meeting Frank for coffee again. I also volunteered with a neighborhood housing nonprofit, helping older homeowners recognize unsafe repairs before signing contracts. It felt good to use skills I thought retirement had finished with. Derek repaid me slowly. Melissa stopped offering to take care of everything. Their visits became quieter and more respectful. If they wanted a place in my life, they would have to earn it through what they did next, not what they promised. Noah kept working with his therapist. Some days he barely spoke. Other days, a few words became a sentence. Nobody made a spectacle of it. One Saturday morning, he stood beside me while I mixed batter at the kitchen counter. He watched for a moment. Then he said, "Grandpa, can we make pancakes?" There was no warning in his voice, no fear, just a boy asking his grandfather for breakfast. I handed him the whisk. What happened to me taught me something I wish I had understood much earlier. Loving your family does not mean giving them unlimited access to your money, your home, your decisions, or your dignity. I spent too long believing that keeping the peace was the same as keeping the family together. It was not. Peace built on fear, guilt, or silence is only temporary, and sooner or later someone pays for it. If you ever feel that people around you are making important decisions on your behalf without including you, do not ignore that feeling simply because they are family. Ask questions. Keep records. Read what you sign. Speak directly with your doctor, attorney, bank, or anyone else involved in your affairs. At the same time, do not assume every mistake means someone is against you. Be willing to admit when you forget something or need help. Getting older, grieving, or needing support does not erase your right to choose who provides that support and how. I also learned that forgiveness should never require pretending nothing happened. People can change, but real change is shown through consistent actions, not emotional promises. Derek and Melissa were still my family, but that no longer meant they could avoid consequences. Most importantly, I learned from Noah that silence may prevent an argument today, but it can create a much deeper wound tomorrow. Speak with honesty, listen carefully, set boundaries before resentment grows, and never teach the people you love that they must surrender their voice in order to belong. For 2 years, I thought silence was what kept a family together. It took an 8-year-old boy finding his voice to teach me that a family worth keeping should never require you to lose your own.